The scream pierced through Miami International Airport like a siren cutting through chaos. 8-year-old Nico Moretti collapsed to his knees in the middle of Gate B12, his small hands pressed against his ears as if trying to block out the world itself. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, announcements echoed endlessly, and hundreds of travelers created a wall of overwhelming noise. "What's wrong with that kid?" someone muttered, pulling out their phone to record. "Where are his parents?" another voice demanded with obvious judgment. The boy rocked back and forth, tears streaming down his face, lost in a sensory overload that no one around him understood. Passengers stepped around him like he was an obstacle, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others filming his breakdown for social media. But Marissa Hale saw something different. From behind the customer service counter, the 31-year-old single mother recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a child drowning in sensory chaos, fighting a battle no one else could see. Without hesitation, she abandoned her post and walked directly toward the crisis that was about to change her life forever. Kneeling beside him, she didn't touch. Not yet. Instead, she placed her palm flat on the cool airport floor and began breathing deeply, slowly. The boy's tear-filled eyes found hers, and something shifted. She gently pressed her forehead to his, matching his breathing until the screams faded to silence. The airport fell quiet, watching in amazement as a stranger's kindness accomplished what seemed impossible. That's when the men in expensive suits appeared, and behind them, a figure whose presence made everyone instinctively step back, Adriano Moretti, whose dark eyes held both relief and something far more dangerous. Welcome to Passion and Power. If this story of unexpected connection and dangerous love has already captured your heart, comment where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more incredible romance stories that will keep you completely captivated. Marissa Hale's day at Miami International Airport had started like any other, dealing with frustrated passengers, lost luggage complaints, and the endless chaos that summer travel brought to Florida. At 31, she'd been working customer service for 3 years, ever since her divorce left her struggling to support herself and her 6-year-old daughter, Amelia. The job wasn't glamorous, but it provided health insurance and steady income, 2 things she couldn't afford to lose as a single mother. Her modest apartment in Kendall was a 40-minute commute, but it was what she could manage on her salary. "Ma'am, this delay is absolutely unacceptable," snapped a woman in designer clothes, her voice sharp with entitlement. "I demand to speak to your supervisor immediately." Marissa maintained her professional smile, despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "I understand your frustration. Let me check what information I can find about your flight." Thunderstorms had created a domino effect of delays throughout the terminal, leaving hundreds of passengers stranded and increasingly angry. Marissa had been fielding complaints for hours when the scream cut through the airport's constant noise. It wasn't the cry of a typical tantrum. This sound was raw, desperate, filled with genuine distress that made her maternal instincts flare immediately. Her head snapped up, customer service training forgotten as she searched for the source. Near Gate B12, a small boy had collapsed to his knees on the polished floor. His hands were pressed tightly against his ears, his body rocking back and forth in a rhythm Marissa recognized with painful clarity. The fluorescent lights, constant announcements, mechanical sounds, and hundreds of conversations were creating a sensory assault that was overwhelming him completely. "Someone needs to control that child," muttered a businessman, adjusting his tie with obvious irritation. "Where are his parents?" demanded another passenger, pulling out her phone to record the scene. "He's disrupting everyone," complained a woman nearby, shaking her head in judgment. But Marissa saw something entirely different. She saw a child drowning in sensory overload, fighting a battle that no one around him understood. Her younger brother had faced similar struggles with autism, and she'd spent countless hours learning techniques to help him through episodes exactly like this. "Excuse me," she told the demanding passenger, already moving around the counter. "Where are you going? I'm not finished," the woman called after her. But Marissa was already walking quickly toward the distressed child, her heart breaking at the sight of him struggling alone in a crowd of judgmental strangers. Security guards approached cautiously, clearly unsure how to handle a child in complete meltdown. She knelt down several feet away from the boy, careful not to invade his space during such a vulnerable moment. Instead, she placed her palm flat on the cool airport floor and began breathing deeply, audibly, a grounding technique she'd learned years ago. The boy's dark eyes, red-rimmed and filled with tears, found hers through his distress. She could see the intelligence trapped beneath the overwhelming chaos, the awareness that made his struggle even more heartbreaking. "It's okay," she whispered, barely audible over the airport noise. "I know it's too loud. I know everything feels like too much right now." His rocking motion slowed slightly as he focused on her calm presence. Marisa gradually moved closer, maintaining eye contact and steady breathing. When she gently pressed her forehead to his, a pressure technique that provided grounding without restraint, his cries began to fade. The transformation was remarkable. Within minutes, the boy's desperate sobs had quieted to shaky breaths, then to complete silence. He leaned into her calming presence as if she were a lighthouse in his storm. The change in the terminal's atmosphere was immediate. The crowd that had been filming and judging fell silent, watching in amazement as this stranger accomplished what seemed impossible. Phones were lowered, complaints forgotten as hundreds of people witnessed genuine compassion in action. That's when Marisa became aware of a different kind of tension filling the air. 3 men in expensive suits had appeared, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of professional training. Their faces were serious, alert, scanning the crowd with the vigilance of bodyguards. But it was the 4th figure that made Marisa's breath catch. He was tall and commanding, probably in his late 30s, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his olive skin speaking of Mediterranean heritage. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marisa made in months, but it was the white dress shirt underneath that caught her attention, unbuttoned at the top 4 buttons, revealing a glimpse of muscular chest and a subtle tattoo on the side of his neck. A platinum watch gleamed on his wrist as he approached with fluid, controlled grace. But it was his eyes that held her captive, dark, intense, filled with a mixture of relief and something that looked almost like fear as they fixed on the child in her arms. "Nico," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight Italian accent. The boy looked up from Marisa's shoulder, and she saw his face transform with complicated emotions, love, wariness, and something that looked like guilt. "Papa," he whispered. The man's gaze shifted to Marisa, and she felt as if she were being evaluated by someone accustomed to making critical decisions quickly. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear deep emotion underneath. "Who are you?" he asked, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "And how did you calm my son?" The private conference room at Miami International felt sterile and impersonal, but Marisa was grateful for the privacy. Sitting across from Adriano Moretti at the polished table, she found herself studying him more carefully now that the immediate crisis had passed. He was undeniably handsome, but there was something guarded about him, the way he sat perfectly straight, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the careful precision of his words. This was a man who lived with constant vigilance, and she wondered why. Nico remained close to her side, occasionally reaching for her hand when the unfamiliar environment became overwhelming. The connection between them was genuine, but Marisa was careful not to read too much into it. Children often gravitated toward people who understood their struggles. "Miss Hale," Adriano began, his voice professionally courteous, "I need you to understand that my family values privacy extremely highly." "Of course," Marisa nodded, though she wasn't sure why he felt the need to emphasize this. "I won't discuss what happened today with anyone." "I appreciate that, but it's more complicated than simple discretion." He leaned forward slightly, and she noticed how the movement made his expensive watch catch the light. The incident today was filmed by multiple people. Those videos are already circulating on social media. Marisa felt a flutter of unease. "I don't understand why that's a problem. People help children in distress all the time." "Not children from my family," Adriano said quietly, and something in his tone made her pay closer attention. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor shifted, the careful politeness replaced by something much more dangerous. He showed her the message without comment. "We found the girl." "I don't understand," Marisa said, though ice was already forming in her stomach. "What does that mean?" "It means that by helping my son, you've inadvertently put yourself in a difficult position," Adriano replied, his voice now carrying an edge that made her realize he was much more than just a wealthy businessman. What kind of position? But even as she asked, Marisa was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. "Miss Hale, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." His dark eyes fixed on hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Do you have somewhere safe you could take your daughter, somewhere far from Miami, where no one would think to look for you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "Are you saying we're in danger?" "I'm saying that possibility exists, and I take all possibilities seriously when it comes to protecting people who've helped my family." Marisa stood abruptly, panic rising in her chest. "I need to call my daughter. I need to make sure she's safe." "She's safe," Adriano assured her, but his certainty was somehow more frightening than reassuring. "My people are already watching her summer camp, your apartment, your usual routes. But Miss Hale, you need to understand that this situation requires careful handling." "Your people?" Marisa's voice cracked slightly. "What exactly do you do for a living, Mr. Moretti?" The question hung in the air between them. Adriano was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I handle business interests that sometimes put my family at odds with other business interests," he said finally. "Today, those interests became your concern as well." It wasn't really an answer, but the careful way he avoided specifics told Marisa everything she needed to know. Whatever Adriano Moretti's business was, it was dangerous enough to put innocent people at risk simply by association. "I want to take my daughter and go home," she said firmly. "That's not possible right now," Adriano replied, his voice gentle but implacable. "Your apartment is being watched. Your workplace is being monitored. The people who sent that message know your routines, your habits, your vulnerabilities. Then what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you and your daughter accept my protection until this situation can be resolved." Marisa stared at him in disbelief. "You're asking me to trust a complete stranger with my daughter's life?" "I'm asking you to trust someone who has more resources to protect you than anyone else in this city," Adriano corrected. "Someone who owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." "I don't want your debt," Marisa said sharply. "I helped a child who was in distress. That's what any decent person would do." "But not everyone would have succeeded," Adriano said quietly, his eyes moving to Nico, who was listening to their conversation with the too serious expression of a child who'd learned to understand adult problems. "In 8 years, no one has ever been able to calm him the way you did today." Despite her fear and confusion, Marisa felt her heart soften as she looked at Nico. He was such a sweet, intelligent boy, and she could see how much he struggled with a world that often felt too overwhelming to navigate. "He just needed someone who understood," she said softly. "Yes," Adriano agreed. "He did. And now that understanding has created a connection that other people want to exploit." His phone buzzed again. This time, when he looked at the screen, his jaw tightened visibly. He turned the device toward her, and Marisa felt the blood drain from her face. It was a photo of Amelia at her summer camp, her bright smile circled in red. "The decision just became much simpler," Adriano said grimly. "Dario, prepare the cars. We're leaving now." As they gathered their things to leave the airport, Marisa realized that her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. She wasn't falling for Adriano Moretti. She barely knew him, and what she did know frightened her. But she was beginning to understand that he might be the only person who could keep her daughter safe, and for now that would have to be enough. The Moretti estate in Coral Gables was unlike anything Marisa had ever seen outside of movies. Hidden behind high walls and electronic gates, the Mediterranean-style mansion sprawled across manicured grounds that seemed to go on forever. But despite its beauty, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was entering a very expensive prison. "This is where you live?" Amelia asked in wonder as their convoy pulled up the circular driveway. "This is where we'll be staying for a while," Marisa corrected carefully. not wanting her daughter to get too attached to luxury they couldn't afford and wouldn't keep. Adriano had been quietly professional during the drive, occasionally speaking in Italian to his men, but otherwise maintaining the careful distance of a businessman handling an unfortunate situation. Marissa appreciated that he wasn't trying to charm her or make promises he might not keep. "Mama!" Amelia's voice cut through her thoughts as her daughter came running down the front steps, followed by an elegant woman in her 30s. "Amelia, baby." Marissa caught her daughter in a fierce hug, relief flooding through her. "Are you okay? Were you scared?" "No, Mama. The nice lady picked me up from camp and said we were having an adventure." Amelia's eyes sparkled with excitement. "She bought me ice cream and told me about the big house." "I'm Francesca," the woman said, extending her hand to Marissa, "Adriano's sister. I hope you don't mind that I collected Amelia from camp. We thought it would be less frightening for her if a woman explained the situation." "Thank you," Marissa said gratefully. "That was very thoughtful." Amelia noticed Nico standing quietly behind Marissa and immediately brightened. "Are you my new friend?" Nico nodded seriously. "I'm Nico. Do you like to read?" "I love reading," Amelia exclaimed. "Do you have good books here?" "Lots of books," Nico said, his face lighting up slightly. "Want to see the library?" As the children headed toward the house, chattering about their favorite stories, Marissa felt some of her tension ease. At least Amelia seemed to be adapting well. "She's lovely," Adriano said, watching the children. "You've raised her well." "Thank you," Marissa replied, then added more honestly, "This is all very overwhelming. I'm not sure how to process any of it." "That's understandable," Adriano said. "Would you like to see where you'll be staying, or would you prefer to rest first?" Before Marissa could answer, Dario appeared with a tablet, his expression serious. "Boss, we've had 3 vehicles conducting surveillance around the perimeter. They're gone now, but they were definitely scouting." Adriano's demeanor immediately shifted from gracious host to something much more dangerous. "Double the security rotation. I want complete coverage of all access points." "Already in progress," Dario confirmed. Marissa watched the exchange with growing unease. "How dangerous is this, really?" Adriano was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the grounds. "Dangerous enough that I take every precaution seriously," he said finally. "But not so dangerous that you need to be afraid while you're here." It wasn't really an answer, but Marissa was beginning to understand that Adriano Moretti was a man who chose his words very carefully. "I should check on the children," she said, needing some distance to process everything. "Of course. Rena will show you to your rooms." An older woman with kind eyes appeared as if summoned. "Miss Hale, I'm Rena, the house manager. Let me show you where you'll be staying." The guest suite was larger than Marissa's entire apartment, with windows overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Amelia's connecting room had been prepared with toys and books that looked carefully selected for a 6-year-old girl. "Mr. Moretti wanted to make sure your daughter felt welcome," Rena explained. "This is very kind, but we can't stay long," Marissa said. "I have a job, responsibilities." "Mr. Moretti has spoken with your supervisor," Rena said gently. "Everything has been arranged." The casual way her life was being reorganized should have angered Marissa, but she was too exhausted and overwhelmed to feel anything but grateful that someone was handling the details. That evening, they shared dinner in a dining room that could have seated 20 people. Adriano was a gracious host, asking Amelia about her interests and listening seriously to her chatter about summer camp. But Marissa noticed how his eyes constantly moved to the windows, how he positioned himself where he could see all entrances, how his phone remained within easy reach. This was a man who lived with constant vigilance, and she was beginning to understand why. "Miss Marissa," Nico said quietly during dessert, "are you going to stay with us for a long time?" The hope in his voice made her heart ache. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to see what happens." "I hope you stay," he said simply. "Papa smiles more when you're here." Marissa glanced at Adriano, who was carefully not meeting her eyes. She hadn't noticed him smiling more, but then again, she'd been too focused on her own fears to pay attention to his emotional state. Later, after the children were settled in bed, Marissa found herself on the terrace with Adriano, looking out over the gardens. The night air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the ocean. "This is beautiful," she said, trying to make conversation. "My mother designed these gardens," Adriano replied. "She said every home should have a place where you could find peace. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was." His voice carried old sadness. "She died when I was 15. "I'm sorry," Marisa said softly. "That must have been very difficult." "It was the beginning of understanding that nothing good lasts forever," Adriano said, then seemed to realize how dark that sounded. "But it also taught me to protect what matters while you have it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and Marisa found herself studying his profile in the moonlight. He was undeniably attractive, but more than that, there was something about his quiet intensity that drew her attention. He was clearly a man carrying heavy responsibilities, and she found herself wondering what his life had been like before those responsibilities claimed him. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Why is helping your son so important to you that you'd risk bringing strangers into your home?" Adriano was quiet for so long that Marisa thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Because I failed him," he said simply. "His mother died when he was 4, and since then I've been failing him every day. I don't know how to help him, how to give him what he needs, but you do." The raw honesty in his admission surprised her. This was clearly not a man who admitted failure easily. "You haven't failed him," Marisa said gently. "He's a wonderful boy. Sensitive, intelligent, kind. Those qualities come from good parenting." "Those qualities come from his mother," Adriano corrected. "What comes from me is the danger that follows our family everywhere." "And the protection," Marisa pointed out. "The resources to keep him safe, the determination to find solutions to his problems. That comes from you too." Adriano turned to look at her, and in the moonlight she could see surprise in his dark eyes, as if he wasn't used to anyone defending his parenting. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." The moment felt intimate in a way that made Marissa's pulse quicken, but she reminded herself that gratitude wasn't the same as attraction, and attraction wasn't the same as anything real or lasting. "I should check on Amelia," she said, stepping back from whatever was building between them. "Of course," Adriano replied, but his eyes lingered on her face as she headed back toward the house. As Marisa settled into the luxurious guest room that night, she tried to sort through her conflicted emotions. She was grateful for Adriano's protection, touched by his obvious love for his son, and increasingly curious about the man beneath the careful control. But she was also realistic enough to know that gratitude and curiosity weren't the foundation for anything lasting. Whatever this situation was, it was temporary. And she needed to remember that, no matter how safe and cared for she felt in this beautiful house. No matter how her pulse quickened, when Adriano Moretti looked at her with those dark, intense eyes. 3 days at the Moretti estate had settled into an unexpected routine. Mornings were spent with the children, Nico teaching Amelia chess while she showed him how to braid friendship bracelets. Afternoons involved swimming in the pool or exploring the extensive gardens. Evenings meant family dinners where Adriano listened patiently to Amelia's chatter and helped Nico with his reading. It was almost normal, if you could ignore the armed guards positioned around the property and the way Adriano's phone constantly buzzed with what were clearly business calls. Marisa was careful to maintain emotional distance. Adriano was unfailingly polite and considerate, but she reminded herself daily that this was a temporary arrangement born of necessity, not choice. She was grateful for his protection, but she couldn't afford to read more into his kindness than simple obligation. "You're very quiet today," Francesca observed, joining Marisa on the terrace where she was watching the children play in the garden below. "Just thinking," Marisa replied. "This is all so far from my normal life." "What is your normal life like?" Francesca asked with genuine curiosity. "Simple, predictable. We have a small apartment. I work at the airport. Amelia goes to school and summer camp. We watch movies on Friday nights and go to the park on weekends." Marisa smiled softly. "Nothing exciting, but it's ours. And you miss it." "I miss the certainty of it," Marisa admitted. "Knowing what each day would bring, being able to plan for the future. This feels like living in suspension. Francesca nodded thoughtfully. Adriano mentioned that you've been asking about when you can go home. Every day, Marisa confirmed. Not because I'm ungrateful, but because I need to understand what we're dealing with, how long this might last, what the realistic timeline is for resolution. And what does he tell you? That he's working on it, that these things take time, that my safety is his priority. Marisa sighed. All true, I'm sure, but not very helpful for planning. He's protecting you from information that might frighten you, Francesca said gently. I'm already frightened, Marisa replied. The unknown is always scarier than the truth. Before Francesca could respond, raised voices from inside the house caught their attention. Through the open doors, they could see Adriano in his study, speaking rapidly in Italian to Dario and two other men. Even without understanding the language, the tension was unmistakable. What's happening? Marisa asked, alarm rising in her chest. Francesca's expression had turned serious. I don't know, but it's significant. They moved inside just as Adriano emerged from his study, his face grim. When he saw Marisa, he seemed to make a conscious effort to soften his expression, but the worry in his eyes remained. Is everything all right? Marisa asked. There's been a development in the situation, Adriano said carefully. Nothing that changes your safety here, but it does affect the timeline for resolution. What kind of development? Adriano hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. The people who've been watching you made a move against one of my businesses last night. It was unsuccessful, but it confirms that they're escalating their efforts. Someone was hurt. Marisa's voice was sharp with concern. My people are fine, Adriano assured her, but the message was clear. They want my attention. Dario appeared at Adriano's shoulder. Boss, the families are watching to see how we respond. We need to make a decision. I know, Adriano replied tersely, but not while we have guests in the house. Guests? Marisa's voice carried an edge. Is that what we are? Adriano's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw something flicker there. Hurt, perhaps, or frustration. You're under my protection, he said quietly. That makes you my responsibility. But we're also limiting your options, aren't we? Marisa pressed. Our being here is preventing you from handling this situation the way you normally would. Marisa, isn't that true? She demanded. Adriano was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Yes, he admitted finally. But that doesn't change my priorities. Maybe it should, Marisa said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Maybe Amelia and I should leave, find somewhere else to go until this is resolved. No. The word was sharp, final. Absolutely not. Why? Marisa challenged. You said yourself we're limiting your options. If you could handle this situation without worrying about collateral damage. I said no, Adriano interrupted, stepping closer. You're not leaving. Not until this is finished. You can't just decide that for me, Marisa shot back, her own temper flaring. I'm not one of your employees to be ordered around. No, Adriano agreed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're something much more important than that. The words hung in the air between them, charged with an emotion that made Marisa's breath catch. She was suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, of the intensity in his dark eyes, of the way her heart was racing. What does that mean? She whispered. Before Adriano could answer, Nico's voice cut through the tension. Papa, why is everyone talking so loud? They turned to see both children standing in the doorway, Amelia holding Nico's hand protectively. The sight of their worried faces immediately deflated the confrontation. We're not arguing, Piccolo, Adriano said gently, kneeling down to Nico's level. We're just discussing some grown-up things. Are you mad at Miss Marisa? Nico asked, his dark eyes moving between the adults. No, I'm not mad at Miss Marisa, Adriano assured him. Sometimes adults disagree about things, but that doesn't mean we're angry with each other. Nico seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. Okay. But we're still having movie night tonight, right? You promised. Adriano's expression softened completely. Of course we're having movie night. What movie did you and Amelia choose? The Princess Bride, Amelia announced excitedly. Nico's never seen it, and I told him it has sword fighting and true love. Everything a good story needs, Adriano agreed, ruffling her hair gently. As the children ran off to continue their games, the earlier tension returned, but it felt different now, more complex, layered with emotions that neither adult was ready to examine too closely. We need to finish this conversation, Adriano said quietly. Do we? Marissa asked. Because I think your position is pretty clear. My position is that I won't let anything happen to you or Amelia, Adriano said firmly. But my reasons for that position are more complicated than simple obligation. Before Marissa could ask what he meant, Dario reappeared with urgent news that required Adriano's immediate attention. As he was pulled away to deal with the latest crisis, Marissa was left with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that her feelings about Adriano Moretti were becoming dangerously complicated. That night, as they settled in the media room for movie night, Nico curled up against Marissa's side while Amelia claimed the spot next to Adriano. Marissa tried to ignore the way her pulse quickened when Adriano's eyes met hers over the children's heads. She was beginning to care for him, despite her best efforts to maintain distance. But caring for someone and building a life with them were two very different things. And until she understood what kind of man Adriano really was and what kind of life he could offer, she needed to protect her heart as carefully as he was protecting her safety, even if that protection was becoming harder to maintain with each passing day. The attack came just before dawn on their 7th day at the estate. Marissa woke to the sound of gunfire and shouting, her heart immediately racing as the danger she'd been trying not to think about became terrifyingly real. She grabbed Amelia from the bed beside her and ran to Nico's room, finding him already awake and trembling. "What's happening, Mama?" Amelia asked, her voice small with fear. "I don't know, baby, but we need to stay together," Marissa replied, gathering both children close. Francesca appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Safe room. Now." They followed her through corridors Marissa had never seen before, down a hidden staircase behind a bookshelf, into a reinforced room deep in the basement. The space was equipped with monitors, showing security feeds from around the property, and what Marissa saw made her blood run cold. Men in dark clothing were scaling the walls, moving through the gardens with military precision. The estate's security team was responding, but they were clearly outnumbered. "Where's Adriano?" Marissa demanded. "Fighting," Francesca replied grimly, her fingers flying over a control panel. "He's buying us time." On one of the monitors, Marissa caught sight of Adriano moving through the house with deadly efficiency. He moved like a man born to violence, every motion calculated and lethal. But even from the grainy security footage, she could see he was outnumbered. "There are too many of them," she whispered. "Papa's strong," Nico said quietly, but his voice trembled with fear. "He always wins." Amelia wrapped her arms around Nico protectively. "My mama says everything will be okay," she told him with 6-year-old certainty. "And my mama's always right." Marissa wished she shared her daughter's confidence. The sound of gunfire grew closer, and suddenly the lights in the safe room flickered. On the monitors, they could see that several attackers had made it into the house itself. "We need to get them out of here," Marissa said urgently. "The safe room is the most secure place on the property," Francesca insisted. "Look at the monitors," Marissa interrupted. "They're working their way through the house systematically. How long before they find the entrance to this room?" Francesca looked at the screens and paled further. Marissa was right. The attackers were moving with the kind of precision that suggested inside knowledge. "There's a tunnel," Francesca said finally. "It leads to the garage." They made their way through a narrow passage that seemed to stretch forever. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of battle, gunshots, shouting, the crash of breaking glass. Marissa tried not to think about what was happening to Adriano. The tunnel emerged behind a tool cabinet in the garage. Francesca moved quickly to one of the armored SUVs, but as she reached for the keys, the garage door exploded inward. Victor Russo himself stood in the opening, flanked by 4 armed men. He was older than Adriano, with silver hair and cold eyes that held no mercy. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent. "The famous Miss Hale. You've caused me considerable trouble." "Let the children go," Marissa said, stepping protectively in front of Nico and Amelia. "They're innocent." "Innocent?" Russo laughed coldly. "The boy is a Moretti. There's no such thing as an innocent Moretti." "He's 8 years old," Marissa said fiercely. "Old enough to learn what happens to his family's enemies," Russo replied. That's when Adriano appeared. He moved like a shadow, emerging from behind one of the cars with a gun in each hand. His white shirt was torn and stained with blood, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. "Let them go, Victor," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with your entire bloodline," Russo replied, "starting with the boy. You'll have to go through me first." The next few seconds passed in a blur of violence. Russo's men opened fire, but Adriano was already moving, using the cars as cover, while returning fire with deadly accuracy. Francesca pushed the children behind an engine block, while Marissa tried to shield them with her own body. When the gunfire stopped, 3 of Russo's men were down. But Russo himself had managed to grab Nico, holding the terrified boy against his chest with a gun to his head. "Drop your weapons, Moretti," Russo commanded, "or the boy dies." Adriano's face went white, but his hands remained steady. "Let him go, take me instead." "I don't think so," Russo said. "You see, I've learned something interesting about you, Adriano. You've gone soft, all because of this woman and her little girl." His eyes moved to Marissa with predatory interest. "Maybe I'll keep them both. The boy can watch his father die, and then I'll decide what to do with his new family." "They're not part of this," Adriano said desperately. "They became part of this the moment you decided to protect them," Russo replied. That's when Marissa understood. This wasn't just about hurting Adriano, it was about destroying everything he cared about. "You're wrong about one thing," she said, stepping forward despite Francesca's attempts to hold her back. "And what's that?" Russo asked. "He didn't choose us over his survival," Marissa said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "We chose each other, all of us, and that makes us stronger than you'll ever be." As she spoke, she caught Adriano's eye and saw understanding pass between them. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Nico," she said gently, "remember what we practiced? The breathing exercise." The boy's frightened eyes found hers, and slowly he began to follow the breathing pattern she'd taught him. As his body relaxed, he became a smaller target, giving Adriano the opening he needed. The shot was perfect. Russo dropped without firing his own weapon, and Nico ran straight into Marissa's arms. As sirens wailed in the distance and Adriano's security team secured the scene, Marissa held both children close and realized that everything had changed. Not just because of the violence, but because of what she'd discovered about herself and about the man who had risked everything to protect them. "It's over," Adriano said, kneeling beside them. His hands were gentle as he checked Nico for injuries, then looked at Marissa with eyes full of gratitude and something deeper. "You're all safe now." "Are you hurt?" Marissa asked, noticing the blood on his shirt. "Nothing serious," he assured her, then pulled all 3 of them into his arms. "I thought I might lose you, all of you." "You didn't," Marissa whispered against his shoulder, finally allowing herself to acknowledge what her heart had been trying to tell her for days. "We're here. We're all here." And as they held each other in the aftermath of violence, Marissa realized that somewhere between the airport and this moment, her feelings for Adriano Moretti had evolved from gratitude to something much more profound. She was falling in love with him. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like coming home. Years had passed since that terrifying dawn at the Moretti estate, and Miami had become home in ways Marissa never could have imagined. The penthouse apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay was beautiful, but it was the laughter echoing through its halls that made it truly special. "Mama, Nico's beating me at chess again," Amelia called from the living room, her voice carrying mock indignation mixed with genuine pride in her adopted brother's skills. "That's because you keep trying to make your pieces dance instead of thinking strategically," Nico replied, with 10-year-old wisdom, his voice carrying none of the anxiety that had once defined him. Marissa smiled as she prepared lunch, listening to their familiar banter. The sound of their easy friendship still filled her heart with warmth, even after all this time. Are they debating chess strategy again? Adriano asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and pressing a gentle kiss to her neck. Always, Marisa replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. Though I think Amelia secretly enjoys losing to him. It gives her an excuse to demand rematch after rematch. Smart girl, Adriano murmured. She learned that persistence from her mother. Marisa turned in his arms, noting that he'd changed from his business suit into casual clothes. The white shirt was still there, always the white shirt. But now it was paired with jeans and the relaxed demeanor of a man who had found peace. Good meeting, she asked, straightening his collar out of habit. Productive, he confirmed. The legitimate businesses continue to grow. The other activities become less necessary every month. It had been a gradual transition, moving the Moretti organization away from its criminal roots toward legitimate enterprises. The security company, real estate investments, and restaurant chain were all legal now, all clean. Adriano had kept his promise to build a different kind of legacy for Nico and for the family they'd created together. Mrs. Moretti, he said softly, his fingers playing with the wedding ring on her left hand, have I mentioned today how grateful I am that you walked into our lives? Only about a dozen times, Marisa replied with a smile. But I don't mind hearing it again. I am grateful, he said seriously. Every day I wake up grateful that you saw a little boy in pain and chose to help him, that you chose to stay when staying was dangerous, that you chose us. We chose each other, Marisa corrected, echoing words that had become their family motto, all of us. From the living room came the sound of a chess piece hitting the floor, followed by Amelia's triumphant checkmate and Nico's surprised laughter. Did she just... Adriano began. I think she did, Marisa confirmed with pride. They found the children celebrating Amelia's first chess victory over Nico, who was graciously congratulating his sister despite his obvious shock at being outmaneuvered. She's been practicing in secret, Francesca announced from the doorway, her smile wide with amusement. I've been helping her. Aunt Francesca, Amelia launched herself at Adriano's sister, who had become as much family as anyone. Did you see? I finally beat him. I saw, Francesca confirmed, catching the girl in a warm hug. Though I suspect your brother might have let you win that last move. I did not, Nico protested, but his grin gave him away. As Marisa watched her family, because that's what they were now in every way that mattered, she marveled at how far they'd all come. Nico had grown into a confident, caring boy whose sensitivity was now a strength rather than a vulnerability. Amelia had blossomed under the love and attention of her new family, her natural empathy deepened by their shared experiences, and Adriano. Adriano had become the man she'd glimpsed beneath the dangerous exterior that first day at the airport. Still protective, still commanding when necessary, but tempered now by love and laughter and the simple joy of watching his children grow. What are you thinking about? He asked quietly, moving to stand beside her. Just this, she replied, gesturing at the scene before them. How perfect it all is, considering how it started with such chaos. The best families usually do start with chaos, Adriano said, pulling her close. Chaos, then choice, then love. That's how real families are made. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of their Miami home, casting everything in golden light, Marisa knew he was right. They hadn't been brought together by chance or convenience, but by the simple act of choosing to care for each other when caring was difficult and dangerous. And in that choice, they had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting, something that would last forever. Their love story had begun with judgment and evolved into acceptance. It had started with a child's scream and grown into a family's laughter. And it was absolutely perfect. What an incredible journey of love, protection, and chosen family. Here at Passion and Power, we believe the most beautiful love stories come from the most unexpected moments. Did this story touch your heart the way it touched ours? Let us know in the comments what your favorite moment was. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories that will keep you completely captivated. Your support means everything to us.